Hello there, I'm Tanya Khazanov, and you are listening to Human and Holy. Today we're going to be exploring Rabbi Jonathan Sacks in honor of his 5th yahrzeit. He passed on November 7th, 2020, left an indelible impact on our generation of Jews, and I'm incredibly excited to explore some of his ideas that have personally moved me. This idea was sparked when I received this tradition journal. I was thrilled to open up my mail and discover that in honor of the yahrzeit of Rabbi Sacks, Tradition had created a double edition, so a fatter, thicker, bigger journal exploring the intellectual legacy of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Just on a personal level, Rabbi Sacks has been a role model to me since I discovered him as a teenager. He articulated Jewish identity and ideas in Torah in ways that I think really gave shape to the culture that we live in. And on a personal level, I remember when I heard the news of his passing and how convinced I was that I had met him, even though I hadn't, and how there was this feeling of personal connection and this vague feeling that we had sat at a Shabbos table together, that I had heard him speak in person, although I had never been in his physical presence. When you have the opportunity to study from someone through their books, to hear their speeches online, through videos, you develop a real sense of connection, and especially when those ideas are eternal and when someone is teaching the teachings of the Torah, and especially with this dignity and love and wisdom that Rabbi Jonathan Sacks brought to the world, there's this feeling of knowing. I felt certain that he was rooting for me, for all of us, to find our voices, to find our identities within the Torah, to own our Judaism in its fullest sense. He appeared to me to be someone who lived with this open-heartedness to the world. When he spoke with love. He spoke with love of Torah, love of Jews, love of humanity, love of this entire universe, love of healing, love of goodness, love of kindness. There was such love in his voice. And when he shared wisdom and deep ideas, it was always to me with this undercurrent of love, with a real, open, deep, present, beating heart. I felt that he was alive within his teachings and his words and his wisdom. And I'm excited to share a little bit of some of his ideas today to honor his legacy and also to bring it forward. Because there was something actually in the introduction of this journal that really touched me from Gila Sacks, his daughter, where she talks about how in the wake of October 7th and everything that the Jewish people have been experiencing over the last few years, people have been asking them time and time again, what would Rabbi Sacks say? What would Rabbi Sacks do? And besides for that being an impossible project, she also said, this is our time, not his. And our call is to develop the work and ideas that he brought to the world and to take full ownership over this project of personal empowerment, not just to ask, what would he say, but to recognize this is our time. And I think this is such a beautiful way of looking at our leaders and teachers, especially those who have passed, to say, this is our time. We study their work because they brought enormous, everlasting wisdom into the world. And in many ways, I think because I didn't know him on a personal level, Rabbi Sacks to me is so alive within the teachings and wisdom that he brought to the world. And I loved that framing of this is our time. This is our time to wrestle with these ideas. This is our time to answer the call of the world. This is our time to respond to current events. This is our time to figure out the path forward. This is our time as a line, as a sentence, as a framework, as a call to every single person to rise into their own power, their own wisdom, and to further develop the teachings of Torah that Rabbi Sacks has brought to the world and others. Today, let's explore Rabbi Sacks. In an essay by Chaim Strachler called The Dignity of Deference, Avoiding Strange Denominational Games, he writes how Rabbi Jonathan Sacks filled this need as a rabbi, not only offered ideas to the world, but also offered an identity, a person to whom one could look to find pride and a role and a modeling of the dignity of being a Jew. He writes, as a society trying to engage reality and preserve tradition, Jews require rabbis to not just assist them in answering their questions and caring for them and their families. They also need figures in which to take pride and establish their own identity. Eli Spitzer uses Rabbi Sacks as an example of someone who met this need. And he quotes him as saying, when people saw that Rabbi Sacks could sit down with Richard Dawkins in a debate and not make a fool of himself, that for them made them feel proud and also made them feel that the modern climate is not necessarily in sync with everything that I believe and with our tradition, but I'm not made to feel like a caveman because of that. Rabbi Sacks was a rabbi on the public stage that one could look to as this model of a dignified Jew, We could take pride in how he was able to show up in these public spaces, and we could identify with that and to recognize that you can stay 100% true to your Torah values and also speak on the public stage in ways that are dignified, empowering, and offer wisdom to all of humanity. Over the course of his life, Rabbi Sacks really began to speak not only to the Jewish community, but to society at large. And he really saw the Jews' responsibility of being a light unto the nations. And he did that for us. And I also think for us, there's such a gift in being able to witness a rabbi in this way, speaking to the modern world, speaking to secular audiences, maintaining the truth and integrity of Torah in ways that can awaken within us the understanding that the teachings of Torah are not far gone, are not from decades past, but are endless wells of wisdom with which to guide and lead the world. I found it interesting that he's quoted as saying that the reason why he started writing books was because once he got a hint and a feeling and a taste of how persuasive public speaking could be, he decided that he must write books. He must write books with footnotes and sources so that people could rip his ideas to shreds. And I found this to be a very interesting anecdote from someone who was incredibly charismatic, who really honed and refined his public speaking abilities and had a method and a way of moving people emotionally through his public speaking and through his speeches that he gave obviously week after week after week. And yet, knowing this ability, which is obviously an incredible ability that he held, he wanted his ideas to stand on his own. And instead of saying, I see how persuasive my public speaking is, so I'm only going to hone that, he said, I see how persuasive public speaking is, and that scares me. I want to ensure that you can rip my ideas to shreds. And so, he says, he began to write books. And we do have an enormous library from him. I thought that thought process was very thought-provoking and really speaks to the integrity of the person who's sharing these ideas. Rip my ideas to shreds. I'm going to divide these topics that we're going to be exploring from Rabbi Sacks into a couple different umbrellas: leadership, purpose, Judaism's vision for the world, love of other people, love of Jews, love of the Torah, his vision for Mashiach, what it looks like to get involved in that vision for Mashiach, and exploring whether or not the world is real and his relationship, and a little bit of his relationship to Jewish mysticism. Beginning with this essay on leadership from Dr. Erica Brown called Staying Alive, The Dangers of Leadership. She highlights how there is something biographical about his fixation on leadership and how he weaves in ideas of leadership in his writings on the weekly Parsha and really wrestles with the notion of leadership. And she ends with this beautiful anecdote of Rabbi Sacks, before becoming chief rabbi of England, going to the doctor to get a health checkup to ensure that he was in the proper health. And part of his medical examination was walking on a treadmill. And he asks the doctor, what are you measuring, speed or distance? But the doctor wasn't measuring speed or distance. He quotes the doctor as saying, what I'm testing is how long it takes when you come off the treadmill for your pulse to return to normal. And Rabbi Sacks writes that this was an important discovery about leadership. True health is measured by the power of recovery. This idea of true health of leadership being measured by the power of recovery, that we are bound to be exhausted by the experience of leading or being empowered in the world. But our health is not measured by how far we go, how quickly we get there, but in our power of recovery. And I think this is an enormous lesson, not just on leadership, but on resilience in general, especially as the world is facing enormous challenges and also for the challenges of our own life. True health being measured by the power of recovery, not by how fast we go, not by how much ground we cover, but that when we experience a setback, when we do exhaust ourselves, how quickly can we return to normal? How quickly can we come back to our center? How quickly can we rebound and come back to that inner state of alignment? I thought this was a beautiful lesson on not just leadership, but on life and how health and spiritual health could be measured. That ability, that resilience to come back and recover from the exhaustion, from the depletion, and come back to steady heart rate. Another thing that marked the leadership of Rabbi Sacks was his endless quest and search for knowledge. And this was highlighted incredibly in an essay by Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Sidensky, where he says he attended a talk given by Rabbi Sacks to post-rabbinic yeshiva university students. And Rabbi Sacks said that during his time as chief rabbi, he read 150 books per year, and he joked about his Amazon addiction to purchase all these books. He also says that he was known for asking all of his students and people he would meet, what are you reading? That the important question is, what are you currently reading? And he also shared that the key to a successful rabbinic career is to keep reading and learning no matter how demanding your life becomes. It is remarkable to me to imagine someone who is busy on such a broad scale, reading 150 books a year amongst everything else that he was doing. But then to consider that maybe this was his secret, that he was a never-ending student of life, and the lesson to each of us: what are you reading? I love that question, what are you reading, as the most important question to ask yourself. What are you reading? What are you consuming? Because this is what shapes us, and this is what gives us the intellectual fabric that we have to work with. And it can be easy when life becomes demanding to slow down on our reading, to slow down on our learning, but it was incredibly inspiring to me to hear from Rabbi Sacks on reading 150 books a year. And I was like, gotta level it up in the reading department. I love to read 150 books a year. I don't think I reach, however, but challenge accepted. Challenge 100% accepted. I thought that was such a solid life lesson, and also just a remarkable question to ask ourselves and others. What are you reading right now? I love that that was his trademark question. What are you reading? A life of reading, to me, is a life of endless growth, hopefully. Rabbi Sacks had a beautiful way of defining and articulating Jewish identity and a sense of purpose connected to our identity as Jews. And he contrasts the identity of a Jew to the contemporary conception of identity that most people experience. He says, imagine you walk into a library, you take a random book off the shelf, you read it, you put it back. You take another book off the shelf, you read it, you put it back. And he says, this is how most people experience identity in modern times and contemporary culture. But then he says, envision that you walk into this library, you're scanning the shelves, and suddenly on the spine of a book, you see your family name. You take out this book, your family name in this grand library, and as you begin to flit through the book, you see things added in many different handwritings, many different names, and you begin to recognize, it dawns on you, that this is a book written by your ancestors from way back, all the way to your grandfather, your father. And as you flip to the last page, there's an empty page, and that page has your name on it. This, he says, is what it means to be a Jew. To walk into the library of life, to discover that there is a book on the shelf that has your family name on it. And not only is it a book of the past, not only is it a story, not only is it your history, your origin story, the development of your ancestors over time, but it is also your book to write. And this, he says, is the experience of Jewish identity. This conversation between past and present, and this endless love story with the Torah, which is not just another book on the shelf, but is a book with our family name on the spine that was both written and is continuing to be written by our own actions and our choices, which we make to continuously be a part of this incredible people. I'll read it in his words. Once I knew that it existed, I could not put the book back on the shelf and forget it, because I would now know that I'm part of a long line of people who traveled toward a certain destination and whose journey remains unfinished, dependent on me to take it further. With that newfound knowledge, I can no longer see the world simply as a library. Other books may make no special claim on me. They may be interesting, inspiring, entrancing, but this one is different. Its very existence poses a set of questions addressed not to the universe, but to me. Will I write my own chapter? Will it be a continuation of the story of those who came before? Will I, when the time comes, hand the book on to my children, or will I by then have forgotten it or given it away to a museum as an heirloom from the past? This is more than an imaginative exercise. There is such a book, and to be a Jew is to be a life, a chapter on it. This interwoven identity of the Torah and the Jewish people, this experience of finding a book on the shelf with your family name on it, opening it and discovering that not only is this a book from the past, not only is this a book of history, not only is this a book that has developed over time, but this is a book that you are being called upon to continue writing. This is a book in which you are being invited to write the next chapter. And this experience of Jewish identity as both an experience of a past and of circumstance and history and origin, and also a call to a sense of purpose and to continuity and to creation. In his book, Tradition in an Untraditional Age, he asks how it is possible that we are said to be created in God's image if God is said to not have an image at all. And he says it is precisely the fact that God has no image that we learn what it means to be a human being. There's no predetermined way that we are chosen to be. We are created in God's image, and God has no image, which means that we get to decide who we are going to be and how we're going to show up in the world. And when it comes to discovering this undetermined identity, this undetermined way of showing up in the world, this enormous choice we have of who we want to be, he writes so beautifully about how to find our own purpose. Listen to this. God commands in generalities, but calls in particulars. He knows our gifts and he knows the needs of the world. That is why we are here. There is an act only we can do, and only at this time, and that is our task. The sum of these tasks is the meaning of our life. When God calls, he does not do so by way of universal imperatives. Instead, he whispers our name. And the greatest reply, the reply of Avraham, is simply Hineni. Here I am, ready to heed your call, to mend a fragment of your all too broken world. To know, to discover, to determine who we are being called in this world, we have to listen for the whispers. Our path and our identities and our task on this earth very much lies in the particularities of our life, the very specific details and nuances that we experience. Rabbi Sacks himself did not expect to be a rabbi. He has an incredible anecdote about his encounter with the Rebbe, the way he defines his interaction with the Rebbe and what it awoke within him was incredibly moving to me. Spending time with the Rebbe for him was like coming face to face with oneself for the first time, not as seeing oneself in a mirror, but rather seeing oneself revealed as a person of unique significance in the scheme of things, discovering one's purpose. Discovering the particularities of our purpose, to discover that our purpose is not just a personal path to happiness and meaning, but is actually a broader call from God to contribute to this next chapter of the Jewish people, to show up for our identities, for this covenant of destiny, not just to fall back on the covenant of faith, but to really see the ways that we are being called to show up with enormous purpose. The description of spending time with the Lubavitcher Rebbe as coming face to face with oneself for the first time. And this idea that a tzaddik is able to awaken and see our souls in ways that allow us to see the strength and power and significance of our souls. Humility is not seeing ourselves as insignificant, but recognizing the enormous divine power that moves through us and how potent and significant and special and important that power within is to the Jewish people's continuity, future, and responsibility to the world. In his book, To Heal a Fractured World, The Ethics of Responsibility, he takes some key biblical stories from the Torah and shows the development of responsibility that a person can have. And he highlights a development of our own understanding of our moral responsibility. He says, first, we discover personal responsibility, that we have freedom to choose. Then we discover moral responsibility, that just because we could choose something doesn't mean that we should, that our choice has limits, that there are places we could take it or should take it. And the third is that we discover and develop a collective responsibility, where we recognize that we are a part of a family, a community, and a society, and we have a share in its innocence and guilt. So first is just the responsibility to myself. Then there's the responsibility to something beyond myself. What is the correct choice? And then is how does my choice reflect on society, and what is my place within the society that I live in, seeing our own freedom to choose in the context of our broader responsibility. We live in a time when Western civilization seems to be very much at odds to Jewish ideas and ideology. And I love the way that Rabbi Sacks frames our relationship to these ideas that seem to chafe against the very essence of what it means to be a Jew, to be responsible to something outside of ourselves, to belong to a people, to not just be individuals, but to have a place in a broader story. He writes about how our culture has moved away from these Judeo-Christian values to a consumer-driven, choice-fixated culture that without norms. We live in a culture that venerates the freedom to do whatever one chooses and to choose to do whatever calls to us as long as it does not harm others. The ideology of the Torah sees us as sovereign beings with complete choice over who we want to be, but also calls us with responsibility to the values and truths of the Torah and pushes us to see ourselves as part of a framework of society, sees us not as independent beings strictly, but as beings that are part of a web of humanity, truly responsible for others. He says that the world that we live in now is not just secular, but secularist. It is impermeable to the values of holiness, to Kedusha. This must force us to reconsider the relationship between Judaism and Western culture. They are no longer readily compatible. This was an unexpected but affirming sentence and concept from him, to really state and highlight how the secular values that we're living within and the Jewish values that we hold are not completely compatible. If they are even less compatible than they ever have been. And yet, his position is not that we segregate ourselves from the world, that we remove ourselves from the world, but rather that recognizing this dissonance between modern secular culture and Jewish culture and values, and using that as a deeper affirmation of how sorely needed our counter voice and counter perspective is. The Jewish voice in the marketplace of ideas has a completely unique viewpoint to offer that the world needs more than ever. And this framework of seeing the ways that the values of Torah clash with certain secular values so intensely, and seeing that clash and seeing that dissonance not as something to run away from, as reason to be afraid of the world, but instead as reason to amp up our voice in the marketplace of ideas, recognizing how crucial the true Torah perspective is in a world that is oversaturated with consumerism and endless choice and a lack of responsibility to the collective. This understanding of our unique identity as Jewish people and the responsibility we hold to the world. I spoke about how the love of Rabbi Sacks that came through to me in the way that he spoke, in his body language, in his words, and in the emotion that I felt in his voice, is something that is really highlighted in many of the writings that he does, speaking about love of others and what it looks like to create a Judaism that really speaks to this responsibility to the world in an incredibly inclusive way. In Rabbi Gideon Sylvester's essay called Toward a Concept of Community, he quotes the dislike of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of the Darwinian approach, in which only the most spiritually fit survived. And he says that Judaism is the first and greatest civilization built on the concept of love, and that every person, no matter how engaged they are in their Judaism, should feel that they have a place of honor in the story of our people. When we describe our sense of responsibility to the world and when we articulate the vision of what it means to be a Jew in today's day and age, do we include every single Jew across the spectrum of Judaism? Do we recognize that every Jew has a place of honor in the Jewish people so completely? Each of us, no matter where we're holding in our Judaism, have an enormous amount to contribute. It is precisely where we are, precisely in the communities that we live in, precisely at the place that we are, that we can contribute and give and deepen our Jewish identity in small and incremental ways. And he speaks a lot about how God lives in the love between two people. God lives in the acceptance of one Jew to another. He asks why there is no blessing when doing an act of kindness. Most positive mitzvos have a blessing that we say before performing them, but you don't see that before giving charity, before visiting sick, before any of these mitzvos, these interpersonal mitzvot, these commandments to love each other. And he presents the idea that the reason why we don't make a blessing before we do an act of kindness for another is because what matters is not the intention in the act of kindness, but it is the impact of the action that matters most. It is the charity given, it is the loneliness that is abated through your visiting, it is the practical impact of the kindness on the other person being given to that matters most in this world. So a mitzvah is about the intention, the God consciousness in the acts that we do. But in the positive mitzvahs that we do in giving to another person, in kindness, God rests not in the intention, but in the impact. And he says, in those moments, the act itself is the blessing. At a 2017 Yeshiva University and the World of Tomorrow conference, he's quoted as rejecting the modern Orthodox title, but really I think it's an incredible lesson for any label within our Judaism, where he speaks about how Jews are already such a minority. As soon as you over-identify with your title, with your subculture, with your subcommunity within Judaism, you've pushed yourself into such a small corner. And he says, and you will end up with what Sigmund Freud rather nicely called the narcissism of small differences. As Jews, we are such a minority, and we can over-identify with our unique hyper-specific expression of being a Jew. And even though we do each have unique and hyper-specific ways of being a Jew, over-identifying with that hyper-specificity can be a limitation in our connection to each other, recognizing that we are one people. The differences between our communities are small differences. We have one Torah, one God, we are one people, and we are so united. And I think this unity and this love, this act itself of love of each other being the blessing, is the foundation of how the Jewish people are able to face the enormous responsibility, the gift of responsibility, and the opportunity that we have to truly be a light unto the nations. And the second love of Rabbi Sacks that I want to talk about is his love of Torah and what it means to be bound up and united with the Torah through a bond of love. He speaks about experiencing God through the Torah, how we are the letters of the Sefer Torah and God is to be found in its words. We are bound to this Torah by a bond of love. Quoting Miriam Feldman Kay in her essay, Ethical Infinity and the Phenomenology of the Scroll, she writes, explaining his perspective on the experience of Torah study, the experience of God through interpretation is an inextricable part of this belief that the transcendent sense through interpretation of certain passages, narratives, and scenes forms part of the revelatory process. We think of the revelation of Torah as something that happened at Sinai and then possibly through our sages, but not something that happens through the personal experience of the letters of Torah. But in his understanding, our experience of the Torah, our interpretations of the Torah, our wrestling with its ideas is part of revealing the deeper inner meaning of the Torah itself. And this is not just through our interpretation of the Torah, but also through our application of its ideas to respond to the call of society, trying to determine and decipher what the values of Torah have to say about how we can show up in response to the values of the world. There's a gorgeous quote from him in his essay called Fundamentalism Reconsidered, where he says the concept of Torah mina shamayim, Torah as revealed command, is a relational one. To read the Torah covenantally is to hear the voice of God who is above time and space, addressing me in my full existential singularity. It is to enter into its words, not as they were addressed to the wilderness generation, but to me, here and now. To read Torah covenantally is to be lifted on the wings of the divine presence, beyond the relativities of the human situation. To read Torah covenantally is to do so as part of the historic community of Israel, the congregation of Jacob, whose heritage it is. It is to hear its words filtered through the tradition of interpretation, accepted as authoritative by the community of faith. There is such a relationship between our interpretation and wrestling with the Torah, with the revelation of the divine word. Those are not two separate things in the way that we think they are, but they are completely interrelated. As he says about the Torah, about finding the spine of the book in a library with your family's name on it. There's a chapter with your name on it, waiting for you to write it. Your Torah study is not just about receiving the wisdom of Torah, but about contributing your experience to the wisdom of Torah, to the destiny of the Jewish people. And this language for Torah study as being relational, as being in dialogue with the text, as being a conversation between God and us here and now, is one that transforms the Torah from being a book in the past to being one that is not just instructive, but transformative for us to really receive the word of the divine, of God, of Hashem in our independent lives, to really see the words of the Torah as words from Hashem to us, asking us to translate them, to experience them, and to see how they're not words from the past, but words that are literally being spoken to us in the here and now, and asking us to respond to it in the here and now. In his famous critique of the Lonely Man of Faith, Rabbi Sacks speaks to the integrative experience of the Jew in modern culture, and says that faith does not have to be a fissure. It does not have to be something that alienates us from society. A person of faith could experience real integration of their faith with their modern identity. He viewed faith as a redemptive bridge between the individual and the world. Some can experience their faith of God as something that is marked by existential despair. And this is something that is spoken to in The Lonely Man of Faith, the innate and inherent and unshakable feeling of loneliness that we can experience in our faith. But Rabbi Sacks, and in ways this to me felt inspired by the integration of the innermost teachings of Torah, which really highlights how God is with a person at every single moment of their life. And this knowing that God is present with us at all times is what allows us to feel not loneliness in our faith, but integration in our faith. And this feeling of the presence of God no matter where we go. So even if we go into a space where we are the only person of faith, even if there are parts of our own characters and selves where we don't feel completely integrated with our faith, just knowing that there is a presence of God there allows us to experience a fusion and a harmony between different parts of our identities. And in an essay by Rabbi Samuel Lebens, which I really enjoyed, called "Was Rabbi Sacks a Theological Maverick or Mystical Traditionalist?" he explores whether or not or how much his thought was impacted by mysticism. And one of the ideas he explores is whether or not we are united and subsumed within the light of God. There's a mystical idea, which is that everything that exists in this physical world is just the imagination in God's mind. That none of this is real, that it's all a simulation, that we are just being imagined by God into existence at every moment. And then there's another point of view, which is that the world is real and that we do fully exist and that creation is real. And this is a tension that Jewish mysticism expresses. On the one hand, we are 100% real, and our Hasidic sages teach us this just through the fact that it says in the Torah, Bereshis bara Elokim, God created a world. So obviously the world is real, and uses this first verse of the Torah to prove that the world is real, creation is real, it is not just a simulation. And yet, at the same time, we could hold the paradox and this truth that also we are like rays of a sun that are not separate from the sun at all. And what I thought was really interesting in this essay, especially as someone coming from a Hasidic background where these teachings are really prevalent in the ideas that I study, is how perhaps Rabbi Sacks changed in his focus over time. That when he was younger, he really focused on this mystical concept of the world being within God's imagination, us being overwhelmed by the sun. And over time, he evolved to really highlight and experience the character and the role that we play in our experience of this world. And I loved this framing because I think that when we do look at these two ideas of the world not being real and the world being completely real, which is something that that paradox is very much highlighted and experienced in Hasidic texts, the question of which one do you choose to focus on, I think is the question of our lives. Both things are real. The world exists, it doesn't exist, I am real, I am not real, I'm just a character, and so on. But what do we choose to focus on in our lives? I thought this was a very compelling question to ask myself and to ask, what do we choose to focus on? As we hold this paradox, do we choose to root completely within this world? Do we choose to root completely into who we are as people and to take this information we know about the mystical worlds to feel a deeper sense of responsibility to the world? Something that could happen when you deeply internalize God's oneness and how imaginative almost the world that we live in is that you can come to a certain existential despair. When we live our lives focused on the realities that we live in, with this awareness and this knowledge of how this world is not all that there is, then we are truly called to be present within our identities, within our personhood, and we can live up to this responsibility that Rabbi Sacks highlights over and over again throughout his life, the way that we are being called as Jews to be a light unto the nations, and that we live in an ecosystem that needs us, and that we cannot segregate ourselves and separate ourselves from the world. We are called and empowered to be leaders. I want to end with his perspective on Mashiach, one that I resonated with so deeply. Mashiach is something that I think all of us have been thinking about lately. When we face uncertainty in the world, when we face struggle and suffering, very often the Jew reaches for this belief that we are called to have as one of the core pieces of faith in our Judaism, this belief that Mashiach will come. Mashiach, this vision of a time when the world will experience revealed godliness, where there will be no more hurt, and where we'll be able to experience our interconnectedness, not just with each other, but with God. And I've always wrestled with the ways that I attached to the idea of Mashiach. And always trying to parse out whether or not Mashiach, the concept of Mashiach, was a crutch to make myself more content and okay with the suffering of the world, and whether or not it was this belief and vision for the future. And in the former, in Mashiach as a crutch, I've always been suspicious of the ways that I personally could use this, we need Mashiach, as an abnegation of my own responsibility to bring the world to it. I found his ideas and words and writings on this to be incredibly instructive and enlightening to how we could experience and look at Mashiach. He speaks about how every book of the Torah, of the Bible, ends on a low note. And he says the reason is because the Jewish people are a people of vision, and we are not yet there. So the belief in Mashiach is about holding a vision of a better future that we are being called to create. In the essay by Mordechai Schiffman and Tamar Wright called Radical Resilience, Hope, Agency, and Community, they speak about the difference between hope and optimism, something that Rabbi Sacks spoke about, which is that he chose to use the word hope instead of optimism, and this is why. He says that optimism has a passive energy to it. Because I trust that it will get better, I don't believe that I need to do anything to make it better. I just know it will get better on its own. Hope, on the other hand, is the possibility that it will get better. It may get better. It could get better. And in that, I have a role to play in making it better. And he says the Jewish people are not optimistic, we are hopeful. We see that we have a role to play in this better and brighter future. Mashiach is not about a passive vision for the future, it's about a proactive vision for the future that we hold as a call for us to create. He says Judaism is the voice of hope in the conversation of humankind. And I love this framing as us being responsible to hold a vision of a future that is so much brighter than the world that we live in, that is experiences so much more God consciousness than the world that we live in, and that we are the holders of that vision for all of humanity. So our vision of Mashiach is not just one that we hold passively for ourselves, it's one that we hold up for all of humanity to see the potential and the possibility of the world. And that vision is regarded with hope because we see that we are only going to get there if we rise up to our responsibility in getting to that place. Mashiach as an empowering vision for us to work towards is one that I get behind completely. Mashiach as a passive crutch that we experience or that we call to or that I call to in moments of suffering because I don't want to face the darkness of the world is one that I feel is an abnegation of the duties that God asks of me. God asks me to see the suffering and to channel it into proactive energy of response to the world and to see my place in making a brighter future. In Dov Lerner's essay called Jacob's Struggle and Messianic Journeys, he writes, speaking to the frustrated hopes of the Second Temple era, he suggests that perhaps the problem was not that the prophets had set the bar too high, but that the nation's commitment to realizing redemption was too low. And I want to offer that we don't recognize our own power in bringing about the redemption, that our barrier to Mashiach is not that it is an impossible task, but that we don't each realize how significant our role is to play in it. And this framing for Mashiach from Rabbi Sacks is enormous to me. This framing of complete empowerment, of recognizing that it's not an impossible vision, but that I have to see my place in that vision, that I have to take responsibility for that vision, that even if we will not complete the work, we are not free to desist from it. We are being called to work towards that vision, to hold the vision so that we could feel that sense of responsibility to it, to continue to write the chapters of the Torah until we come to that chapter of redemption. And while we hold that vision, we need something to sustain us, to give us tastes of that vision to come. We know that Chassidus, the innermost teachings of Torah, is considered to be a taste of what we will experience in the time of Mashiach, when the innermost dimensions of Torah will be revealed. Shabbos as well, our holy day of rest, is known to be a taste of the time of Mashiach. And Dov Lerner writes about how Rabbi Sacks presents Shabbos as our way of maintaining our vision when we live in a world that is very much the opposite of redemptive in many ways. When we live within exile, how do we truly hold that vision? How do we imagine a brighter world? And this is in Dov Lerner's words. Inspired by a statement of the rabbinic sages and later mystics who characterized the Shabbos as a taste of the world to come, Rabbi Sacks calls it Judaism's great messianic institution. For him, Shabbos is not simply a temporal intermission defined by prohibitions. It is a day that simulates redemption. Its insistence that we seize all forms of labor suspends all the ordinary hierarchies of power and has us perform each week a full dress rehearsal for an ideal society that has not yet come to pass, but will. Shabbos, as Judaism's great messianic institution, the way that it is a full dress rehearsal for an ideal society, the way that every single Shabbos we could use our experience of peace, of connection to our souls, to each other, a suspension of all the hierarchies of power, as an opportunity to nurture our imagination of what the world will be in a future time, of the world that we can create. We don't hold this vision and this belief in the redemption only for ourselves. The Jews are called to be a force of imagination of what this world could be. And we nurture that imagination. We nurture that vision through our experience of Shabbos every single week, a full dress rehearsal for an ideal society that has not yet come to pass, but will. These were some of the impactful ideas that I experienced in this beautiful journal about the legacy of Rabbi Sacks. I hope you enjoyed some of these ideas that have touched me. And I encourage you, I'll put some of my favorite books from Rabbi Sacks in the show notes in honor of his 5th yahrzeit to read and study his incredible body of work and to learn from him on what it looks like to truly own our responsibility as Jewish people, to walk into the library of the world and to see our name on the spine of a book, to take it off the shelf, to open up the pages and to experience our covenant, our responsibility, the destiny that we have as Jewish people to write this chapter that has our name on it, that we are the only one who can write, to hold the vision and imagination for the entire world, to recognize how much we can be a strong counter voice of morality and truth in the world, how we can show up to love each other, and how our love of Torah, our relational experience of the Torah, can be a driving force in our connection to our souls and to each other and our responsibility to the world. This man and rabbi truly felt his own responsibility and role in the universe. May we all be inspired by his legacy and recognize, as his daughter says, that this is our time. This is our time. If we are alive on this earth, this is our time to cultivate our ideas, to give to the world, to show up, to shine the light of our souls, and to hold this vision of redemption and recognize our place in working towards it. Thank you, Rabbi Sacks, for your impact on my life, for your role modeling of what it looks like to be a true leader, a Jew who developed their study and their love of Torah and Jews and all of humanity, and really rose to the call of their soul and benefited us all in the process. I honor his memory. I will do a mitzvah in his honor, and thank you for being here with me in this celebration of his ideas, of his contributions to the world, and may we all follow in his footsteps. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It was like my heart is so full, having just explored these teachings and the life of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. New episodes of the podcast come out every Sunday and Wednesday morning. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. You can email us at info@humanandholy.com. I love hearing your feedback. And if you appreciate the work that we are doing, visit humanandholy.com/sponsor, where you can give in any amount, sponsor a specific episode in honor of a birthday, yahrzeit, someone you love. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of this. Wishing you a wonderful day. Bye.